I'm Jim Semick, and I've done this now a few years.
Many years.
And I really enjoy sharing this information with you and this knowledge because I consider it to be kind of a secret. And most startups don't do what we're about to tell you. And I've done this process now, this market validation process, in over a dozen different scenarios, different startups, different products. And I have to tell you, it really works. Because I've been on the other side where we didn't do market validation and we went down in flames, this product that I will tell you about. So I have several case studies that I'll talk about. I'll talk about the process, I'll talk about when it doesn't work and when it does work. And then David will come up and give you some best practices about how to actually implement it, how to actually go about getting people to talk with, how you find people to speak with to conduct this market validation. So, and along the way, jump in with questions. I don't want to be just this rambling voice. I would love it if we had some interaction. So if you have questions, jump in.
Don't hesitate. Throw a hand up if something doesn't make sense. Let's keep it as interactive as we can.
Okay, so
we just feel like we're talking at you.
We've all heard the startup stories, right? We've heard about these overnight successes. People have a brilliant idea. They launch this product. They become an instant billionaire, and that's how it's supposed to work. Well, the way that most startups work is like this. So the first step is you have this genius idea, right? And most of you have an idea that you're coming into NVC with. Am I right? How many of you are on a team that has an idea that you want to validate? How many? Is it all of you at this point? Okay, great. And so most of you have an idea. It's your own idea, or if it's someone on the team, and you're really excited about it. The next stage is let's build it, right? And so we're gonna code this thing. If you have a software idea, we're gonna burn the midnight oil. We're gonna really just race to get this thing out the door. And so there's a lot of excitement about it, and everyone's trying to figure out what is the right way that this thing is supposed to look, and the product gets built. And in some cases, you might even raise a little bit of money along the way here. At this stage, you might talk with some friends and family and raise a little bit of money. And then the next step is we launch this product. And this may have taken a few months. Everyone is super excited. We're flipping the switch to go live. And then the next stage is it's a massive failure because no one buys. And then there are recriminations. Everyone's pointing the finger at everyone else. I told you we needed to do it this way. We didn't do the right marketing. We didn't figure out our customer correctly. And everyone's upset. And mom and dad, who you might have borrowed money from them, or you might have borrowed money from friends. Everyone's upset at everyone else. And in the 1800s, there was a German field marshal who came up with this idea of no plan meets first contact with the enemy. And a few years later, Steve Blank, who is a startup guru who started a number of companies and now preaches market validation and customer discovery, he kind of rephrased it to say, no plan survives first contact with a customer. And then sometime after that, Mike Tyson, the boxer, said, no plan happens after you get punched in the face. And so this idea of, we're going to launch something and we're going to make it amazing and customers are going to love it, that does happen. But most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it goes down in flames. So next one. Okay, so what is market validation when we talk about it? And I have my own definition here, which is you figure out what customers want before you spend a whole bunch of time and money building something that they don't care about. For the next handful of weeks over the break, we would like you to focus on really one area of market validation, and that is discovering a customer segment, and we'll talk about what customer segment means, that has a problem, and we'll talk about what a problem means, to be solved or a job to be done. So this is the main area that we want you to focus on. And so most of my talk tonight is around that concept. And it may seem really simplistic. Well, of course it solves a problem, and of course I need customers. Well, we're going to talk about exactly what that means and how to find out what a real problem is that's valuable enough for someone to pay you to solve it. So then we're also going to talk a little bit about something called the value proposition. And how many of you have heard this concept called value proposition before? Okay, so we're going to define what that is. And we're going to talk about how to figure out a good value proposition for your customers. And then finally, validate that it sustains a business model. And later in the program, you're going to learn a lot about the business model canvas. We'll touch on it a little bit tonight. And the two main areas that you need to focus on the business model canvas. And have they seen the business model canvas yet?
Only in high-level form, okay, on the information sessions and so forth.
Okay, so I'll give you a really cursory overview of the business model canvas. It is required for NVC.
Yeah, so that will be part of your applications that you put in the business model canvas. And we're going to take you into a deep dive in our first workshop in January. Jim will be back for that.
Yeah, great. All right, so I'm going to give you a case study of a scenario where it didn't work. A few years ago, I went to work for a startup here in Santa Barbara called Expert City. And the idea was pretty awesome. It was this idea where we could have, if you had a problem with your software product, maybe you were struggling with understanding how Microsoft Word works or something like that, or your computer has a virus and you need to figure out how to cure the virus. Well, you could go to Expert City and you could say, I have a virus, I want someone to fix it. And then we had a network of experts all over the world who would then bid to win your business. So we considered it to be a reverse auction, and we wanted to become the eBay of tech support. And so we had experts all over that would bid $5, $10, $15 to fix your problem, to cure your virus, to teach you something on Word, something like that. And with that idea, the company raised $30 million. So, and everyone was excited. The investors were really excited about the concept. Everyone in the company was super excited. I remember working long weekends, working on all of these workflows, trying to figure out how the software package was going to work. And we spent $10 million to build out this product, to build out at the time, a server farm, because AWS wasn't in existence then. We spent so much money hiring people, building engineers. Everyone was on fire, just waiting for this product to launch. We flipped the switch and literally no one bought it. We heard crickets. Well, that's not entirely true. We saw maybe $100, $200 per day coming through. And we had spent $10 million building this thing. And we went, oh my God. And you have a question?
How much did you spend on marketing?
Oh, before the launch, we had billboards in San Francisco. We had signage on buses to launch this product that we never figured out ahead of time. Would people actually buy this if we built it? So it's such a basic question. So we spent to your question, we spent a lot of money on marketing in advance.
But everyone needs technical support, so it was a no-brainer.
No one questioned the validity of the concept. So through that process, through that horrible time, the company realized we had $20 million left, and we said, we have one more shot left to build something, and we better make sure that we get the next one right or we're completely out of business. And I'll tell you about that product in a few minutes, because that product now, today, still creates $1 billion of revenue, this other product. So and I'll tell you about the product, over the lifetime of this product, it's created billions of dollars of revenue, billions of dollars of shareholder value, and hundreds of thousands of customers. So, but I'll tell you the process of how we got there. So to back up, the benefits of market validation is it tests your assumptions. And every single time I start a validation of a product, I always go into it thinking, this is a good idea, but I'm probably wrong about a lot of it. I'm probably a little bit off or wrong about my idea about who the customer is, the features that they think would be important, how much we want to charge for the product, how we want to talk about the product, the exact customer segment that we're addressing, that sort of thing. So market validation tests all of these assumptions. And then you'll hear this concept throughout the program called product market fit. And it's this idea that you're developing a product that will have a place in a market. So it's about finding a market that has a high enough problem that they're willing to pay you for it. And this idea of product market fit, through market validation, you can get there faster than you would than if you just launched a product and then you had to create different versions of the product and tweak it and take out some features and add different features that you didn't know about. The other benefit is that it finds your first customers. So when I launched my company about 10 years ago, we went through a market validation process, of course. And through that process, we got our first customers. And these are people who agreed to buy our product before it existed. These are people that, through the process, we developed a compelling enough pitch that they were willing to say, if you build that, we'll buy it. And so it helped us find our first customers. And then it also does other things along the way. It helps you understand what your selling process is going to be. Do you have an online acquisition model, or do you have to have salespeople, for example? It also helps you understand the market sizing. So when you go out to talk with investors, how big is this potential market that we're going to sell to? It helps you understand the minimum viable product, the MVP that Dave mentioned, your marketing message. And then the biggest benefit is it helps you nail what you're going to build, because it is expensive to build a product. It takes so much time. Engineering, if you're building software, engineering resources are very expensive, and you don't really have the luxury of being able to do it over again, especially if you're on a limited budget or you've just raised a small friends and family round. And then if you fail early. And I've done this several times. I've failed and then said, well, we need to look at a completely different market or a completely different product, or we're able to change tact a little bit before we spend a lot of money. And the other benefit of market validation when it comes time for NVC is that it's great proof for future investors for your product. When they hear that you have talked with customers, when you begin to tell them some of the things that you've heard your potential customers say, that has a lot of weight for investors and for the new venture program as well. So yes.
Hi, it's really a stupid question, but for the first customers that are building your product, do they just tell you how buy this product, or do they just sign contracts that they'll buy your product?
You can do it multiple ways. So when and you raise a really good point, and I think David can address some of this in his talk when it comes time to interview these customers. But when you're talking with potential customers, there's always the risk that people are there to please you. People want your nice students, right? You're working on a great project. People want to make you happy. And so people will be excited and say, that sounds like a great idea. Well, you can't always take that at face value. You have to ask them additional questions to try to suss out what their true intentions are. And so if someone says, yes, I'll buy it, well, don't take that at face value. Ask further questions in order to validate that. And in some cases, if you're working on larger business products, you can actually have someone sign some sort of a term of engagement or something that is maybe not a contractual commitment, but it's something that shows their intention. So there are different ways of doing it. Yeah, that's a great question. Excellent. Okay, so this is the product that came out of the ashes of the first company that I told you about. Actually, there was another product before that we conducted market validation on. It wound up being a very successful product, one of the very first SaaS products out in the market. That was called Go to My PC, which was a way of doing screen sharing with other people. So you could be at home on the weekend and you left something at the office, you could screen share with your office computer to get files off of it. So this was very early in the days of the internet and SaaS software. And then the product that followed on after that is this GoToMeeting product. So I conducted a market validation and interviewed only 24 people. And we conducted in-depth interviews that lasted on the order of 45 minutes to an hour per person, and fairly structured interviews. And every single interview, we were learning something new. Every single interview, we were learning about their existing online meeting software. And at the time, there were 30 other online meeting software packages out in the world, including WebEx, and Microsoft had a product. And so we were coming into what's called bloody waters. There was a lot of money being made in the industry. And we looked at the existing players out there and we said, we know that we can do better. We have this idea for easy to use online meeting software, but we didn't quite know what the value proposition was beyond easy to use. Easy to use is nice. Doing something faster, easier, cheaper, those are always good value propositions, but those aren't always enough to be super compelling to have someone switch off of their existing Microsoft product, for example. So we discovered through our interviews something that we had no clue about, which was people were using online meeting software being charged per user per minute, and people hated that. And in fact, it made it a disincentive to using online meeting software. So we said, well, what if we had something where you just pay a flat rate price, all you can use for one price per month? And people said, oh my God, that would be amazing. I know what my bill's going to be every month. I don't have to restrict how many online meetings I do. So this product, this GoToMeeting product, was completely disruptive in the industry at the time. And today Zoom has that model, and Zoom is now I think the winner of the online meeting space. But over the last few years, GoToMeeting has generated billions of dollars of revenue and tens of millions of customers. So it's been a wildly successful product, and I was really proud to be a part of that process. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the framework that we used. So the framework looks something like this, and this is what you'll be doing in the beginning. The first step is to develop a hypothesis. Okay, so you're going to think very much like a scientist here, where you have an idea and you say, my idea is this, and I think my customers is this customer group. I think the way that we're going to sell to the customers is this. I think the feature set that we need to have is this and this and this. And you develop this really rough hypothesis. And if you're spending days on this thing, you're spending too much time, because it will inevitably change. The whole hypothesis will change. So you come up initially with your hypothesis for what problem it is that you're solving. And we'll go into more detail about with some examples of what problems are. And then your idea of the customer segment. So who are you selling to, and how would you describe them? And then the next step after you get through interviewing people with that potential problem, then you go into the next stage, which is proposing a solution for their problem. So you come to them and you say, I understand you have this problem, or I suspect you have this problem. Then you get agreement from them on the problem that you think they have. And then you propose a solution to them. And the solution is the value proposition. And you're basically you're doing a sales job. You're test selling to them. And then you repeat this process again and again to iterate and learn. So every few interviews with people, your whole hypothesis should be changing, because you're learning along the way. And then much, much later, you'll try to identify what your sales model is. So for those of you that can't see, it's identify the sales model, which is how to find and close customers. So the sales model could be a lot of different things, but we won't go into any detail on that. And then you determine how you're going to make money with it. And that comes much later. So that essentially is the market validation process. And you can do it with, a few dozen interviews. Yes?
You
you're bootstrapped early on, though, how do you move forward without knowing your revenue model in advance?
Yeah, well, I can speak firsthand from that. So my company that I started about 10 years ago, we bootstrapped it. We bootstrapped it in the beginning, and we spent probably about 6 months doing market validation before we were convinced enough that we had something there. And then through those interviews, we eventually settled on what we thought would be a good revenue model. Okay, and so we actually talked with our potential customers about that. We said, we understand you have this problem. We understand that our solution is really compelling to you. How does $59 per month sound? And then we went into details about, well, would you put that down on a credit card? Would you have to get approval for that money? And we asked a whole lot of detailed questions until we knew fairly well that we were getting valid information, that we weren't getting false positive feedback. And so it's very possible bootstrapping to come up with a revenue model. And luckily our revenue model that we had estimated with a spreadsheet was accurate for the first 2 years. It was pretty spot on. And so market validation can give you really valid information about your pricing model.
But
Yes.
by bootstrapping, you mean you didn't get paid a salary?
Correct. Yes. I got paid zero. My business partner got paid zero. And we were bootstrapped for the first 10 years. We just growing the business through the revenue of the business. Yes.
Well, you mentioned a few dozen interviews is necessary. Is that because after a few dozen, it kind of is everybody's response to that's pretty the same, or not necessarily the same, but kind of confirm your bottom line, and so you don't really need to do more?
Yeah. Yeah. For those of you who couldn't hear that, the question is a few dozen interviews because the reason is that over time there's a diminishing return for the interviews. So the very first interviews, and David will talk about this, you will be learning so much. Just in your first 3, 5, 10 interviews, you're going to be learning so much. You're going to start to realize how much you don't know after those first few interviews. And then after you begin to learn, and I found the number for my businesses to be about 20 to 30 interviews. When you're doing the 30th interview, you start to hear the same things over and over again, and then you're not learning as much. And so then you can say, okay, I know enough. And then you could either focus on something else or just stop the interviews altogether. So, yes.
In your blog on LinkedIn, I think you said that acquisition costs are really important. Does it come as the next stage or is it later stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is about acquisition costs. And I found that figuring out those elements happens towards the end of the validation. And I can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that is a later stage thing for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and it's important. It's very important. In a validation that I did, I neglected to a validation a long time ago. I neglected to truly understand the acquisition cost, and it wound up being a lot higher than we expected, which threw a lot of the models off. And so it's definitely an important element.
Your first phase, though, is really validating the problem.
Yeah.
Right? Do they really have the problem, and is the concept I'm thinking about for the product going to solve that problem? You're gonna reside there for a while before you get into things like customer acquisition costs.
Yeah.
Ready, Jim?
Yeah. All right. So the business model canvas is a great place to document your hypothesis. And what you're trying to come up with in terms of a problem is a big enough problem that's worth solving. And I know that's ambiguous, but it means that there are so many problems out there, and only some of those problems are high enough priority for people to be willing to pay money to solve it. So that's really what you're after, a big enough problem that's a high enough priority. And then, like I mentioned, start with your best guess, because it inevitably will change. And then you use this business model canvas to document it. And I'll go into where you do this on the canvas. All right. So the two elements that would be wonderful for you to think about and maybe, if possible, do a little validation over the break are these two areas. So the first one is your customer segment. And I'll go into a little more detail later about what customer segments are, but who has the problem that you're thinking about? Okay. So customer segments, you can divide them up in a lot of different ways. I'd like to get a show of hands for how many people are considering developing a product that they would then sell to other businesses. Okay, that's about maybe a third of you. And how many of you are developing a product that you would sell to consumers, direct to other people? Okay, and how many of you either aren't sure or you think you might have a model where it's both? Okay, all right, great. So about another third. Okay, so that's useful information for me. So on the business side, you can organize your customers around the type of business that you would be selling to. So I'm going to be selling to small manufacturers that employ fewer than 500 people that manufacture luxury items. Okay, so that is a market segment, right? And the benefit of being able to define your market segment is that you can then figure out how you can find those people, right? So I can Google, who are the small manufacturers that develop luxury items in the United States, right? Below 500 employees. You can figure that out. And that gives you a way to target who you need to interview. And then the other element is this value proposition. So how are you solving the problem that you think that customer segment has? Okay. And then those other areas of the business model canvas, we'll cover that in January. Those other details. All right, so the customer segments, as I said, identify the businesses or people that you think have a problem. And when it comes time for those of you that are developing products for people, for consumers, you can segment them just like you can a business. So you can segment them based on their demographics. Their age, for example, is one way of doing it. You can segment them based on their perceived problem that you think they have. I'm looking for people between the ages of 20 and 45 that have this problem. You name what the problem is. So there's a way of segmenting them. And so what I like to do when I'm entering a market is try to figure out what the whole market looks like, and then I divide it up into little slices. And I say, this slice here is people between the ages of 25 and 40 who have a problem, have this particular problem. That slice over there is people under age 25 and so on. So you can do it that way. And it's okay to ultimately serve multiple markets, but the benefit of slicing it up and becoming as narrow as you can in the beginning is that it makes the job easier. So it's when you start to think about segmentation, it's much easier to find the people that you're targeting rather than saying my product is for everyone, because where do you start with that, right? So I really believe strongly in this segmentation model. Now, some markets, and I have an example of Uber later, are multi-sided markets. So can anyone tell me what you think the two markets are for Uber? Who are the markets that Uber sells to? Yes?
Drivers and users.
I'm sorry?
Drivers and users.
Drivers and users, yes, exactly. So on one side of the model are drivers, and that is, did I say drivers? And then the other are the consumers, right? And both of them are customers of Uber. How many of you think you might have in your business idea or your idea, you have a multi-sided market where you think you actually need to sell to a couple? Okay, great. Yeah, and I'd love to come back to that because I'd love some examples of
Is it
that.
generally like mediation? As like Uber example, it's like a mediator, right? It's like connecting two parties together.
It can
But
be,
is it like
yes,
can it be something else too?
for
Like
sure.
a multi-sided market, like more than two or like some other example?
Yeah, absolutely. So he used the word mediator, and another word for that is platform. So a lot of platforms are out there where you have two distinct customers that you're aggregating together, and you're providing the mechanism for them to do a transaction, basically. Yeah. So Grubhub is another example, right? Very, very similar to the Uber model.
And in some
Airbnb.
cases, if your revenue model's getting advertising, one side of your market is the user of your product, the other side is advertisers to attract them
That's it.
to spend money
Yeah.
on your platform. And your message is obviously to each of those different.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. The advertiser model is a good one. Good. Okay, next. All right. So I was on the founding team of a company called Appfolio, which is based out in Galena here. They now have, it's now a multi-billion-dollar valuation company, and they got their start in property management software. So I joined in the beginning, and I helped figure out what markets to go into and how do we segment the markets that we were thinking about in order to tackle, to get into the market and tackle it. So we developed, after looking at multiple markets, I did validations for the dental market, for optometrists, for automotive shops, and property management. And we ultimately decided that property management was the best market because it had really high pain. It had a huge problem that we identified. And we thought, there's a segment of this market that we could tackle and get a foothold into the market. And from there, we could expand. And so the next bullet. So as you can imagine, the real estate market and the property management market is huge, right? There's residential property management, there's commercial property management, there's student housing, and then within residential, there are single-family homes that are rented out. There are apartment buildings that are rented out. There are property managers who manage a limited number of those units. They manage maybe 100 units. There's some that manage 10,000 units. Those are all very different markets. And if we had gone to market and tried to address all of those markets, even just in the residential space, we would be building software for years. And so we decided to narrow it down to the smallest slice, which was smaller residential property managers managing less than 500 units. And so this narrow segment had a huge pain. They were using old software. They hated their software. They were buying license. They were trying to scrimp and save money to buy licenses of the software and then not distributing enough licenses within the office so that people would need to get on the intercom within the office and say, can someone get off of this? Can someone free up a license so I could use it? And we looked at that. We went into their offices and we talked with them. We said, what are you doing? We can make this so much easier for you. And that was our market validation. And now it's a $6 billion software business. So this is something for you to consider in your market validations and your market entry is that you could start with a very small segment, make that segment happy, and then expand from there. So you can expand either to other segments like we did with Appfolio and eventually move into commercial real estate and so on, or you can expand geographically. So you can say, I'm going to serve only customers in the state of California. And then over time, you can expand to other geographic regions or beyond the United States. Those are just some ideas about segmentation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about problem and how are we doing on time?
Keep going.
Okay?
Okay.
So I want you to think in terms of pains and gains for a customer job. So everyone has a job to do. Every customer has a job to do, right? The person who is trying to get an Uber, for example, what is their job? Can anyone tell me what job they're trying to accomplish? Yes. Exactly. Yes, their job is to get from point A to point B. And there are a lot of different tools that can help them with that job, right? They can walk, they can bike, they can hail a taxi, they can call Uber, right? So you're during validation, try to figure out what jobs your customer is trying to accomplish. And then think about what sort of pain are they experiencing while they're trying to do that job. So these are problems that they're trying to solve. And the pains that they could have with their job is some sort of negative experience, right? I could be standing in the rain in New York City trying to get a taxi, and that sucks. I don't have an umbrella. I'm experiencing pain trying to accomplish my job. I also can have different emotions around that, right? If you think about all the dating apps that are out there, right? We can think about what problem they're trying to solve with that, right? I want to meet the love of my life. And what are the emotions that I'm experiencing along the way? I'm lonely, I'm sad. So these are all pains that people have while they're trying to solve the job. So if you think in terms of that during your market validation, it'll take you a long way. And then you have to figure out, if I solve this problem, what gains are they going to get, right? Maybe someone would be dry getting from point A to point B in an Uber. Maybe someone would find the love of their life and never be lonely again if they use this app. So you need to think about what gains people might get from solving that problem. All right. Oh, and the other last element is that in your validations, when you're talking with people, make sure and take notes, because after you've conducted 5, 6, 7 interviews, they all start to blur together. And so if you just take a few notes along the way, some of the key points that people are saying, you can then go back through those notes and find patterns. And so once you start to find patterns, you can then piece these things together, and that can have a lot of meaning to you. So people might say something in your first interview that you just gloss over, but by the 5th interview you say, oh, I've heard that before. And then you start to piece that together. That's where real magic happens during market validation. All right, so market validation is getting outside the building and interviewing people. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you interview them face-to-face, although that's ideal. But it could mean a phone call. It could mean a Zoom call with someone. I've always found, though, that especially if you're working on a product that is intended that you want to sell to a business, it is always valuable to go to that place of business. So if you're targeting small manufacturers, for example, try to find some small manufacturers here in Santa Barbara. And I have always found that people are more than happy to share their experience with you, especially if you imply to them that you could solve their problem for them. People will bend over backwards to talk with you. Okay. Then, after you've been through, you discuss it among your team. Then you say, what did we learn? And how do we adjust this pitch? How do we talk about this product? And then you get out and talk with more people. And focus on the job. And this is something to take seriously. If you find that you're running against a brick wall, maybe you're not getting anywhere with people, or people are like, yeah, that sounds pretty good, but I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing today. Well, you might need to pivot. You might need to come up with something completely different. And with my current company, we did that. My original idea was something completely different than what we wound up building. I don't know if you knew that. My original idea was a market validation platform.
I did not know that.
Yes, and I started talking with people about that idea, and people said, that sounds really interesting, but my real problem is this other thing. And we started paying attention to that. And that's what we wound up building. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to talk about value proposition. And this is products and services that you create that create value for your customer by solving a problem. Okay, so it's products and services, and those could be anything. It could be products and services. A lot of software companies and open source software companies especially build valuable software, but they also blend that together with services that they then sell to their customer base. Okay, so they're deriving revenue a couple of different ways, and it's the whole package that they've put together that solves a particular problem. All right, so here's some examples of a value proposition. We can make you more money. We can help you get a job done faster. We can help you get a job done for less money, right? For fewer costs. We can reduce your risk in some way. We can give you some sort of status, or we can make a job easier. I can give you some additional examples.
The status might be, hey, our presentation software is so
Yes.
fantastic, people will think you're great.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And the product of my company, we created beautiful software because our customer segment, it was their opportunity to shine in front of their bosses when they used our software and the presentation mode in our software. So we made it especially beautiful because we knew that they would look good if we made our software. We can make them look really good in front of their bosses. So that's an element to it, right? That's a very intangible element, but it's important nevertheless. All right, another example of creating value is increasing convenience for someone. Okay. So I've used Uber as a couple of times as an example, and they have this multi-sided value proposition, and on one side we have passengers. And the value that they get out of Uber is that it's reliable, fast, and convenient transportation. It's available 24/7. They don't have to worry about that. There's no pain of calling taxis and hailing taxis anymore. They know how much it's going to cost. You don't have to get into the taxi and then worry about getting ripped off. The route is tracked, so there's a safety aspect to it. There are no misunderstandings, so there's a language barrier. It's not a problem. And it's cashless, so I don't need to worry about holding cash and transacting cash. So can anyone give me an example of what they think one of the value propositions would be on the driver's side? What is yes?
Usually taxes its own car, but for example, like I have a car, like I can just use that.
That's a great one. I don't have to go to a company and use their car. I have my own car already. Yeah, so it's a fast way to get started. Yes.
Convenience, you can check in and out whenever you want, make your hours.
Perfect. Make your own hours. That's a great value proposition.
One more, Jim, over here.
Yes.
Low bar entry.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't need to take the driving test to learn all the New York City streets.
Or buy that big
Before I get-
expensive license that they have to buy.
Yes, exactly. They have the medallions, which
The
cost
medallions.
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all great. So I think we have a lot of those here. Okay, so additional income, flexibility, you mentioned, experience, I can just get started right away. I don't need to search for clients, they just come right to me. And then there's also that language barrier, right? If maybe my English is not perfect, and so I don't have misunderstanding. So those are all great. All right, so just like the customer segment, where I've suggested to you that you try to narrow it down to the smallest customer segment that you can. The same thing holds true for the value proposition. So try to figure out what your minimum viable product is, right? Because the tendency when you're talking about the ideas among your team, it's like, oh, we could do this and we can do that. And these are all great ideas, but if you were to try to build all of that, it may take you a very long time. So the idea is to figure out what is the minimum feature set that people will buy So what is the absolute minimum? And I've continually been surprised. Even though I've done this so many times, I'm always surprised that people will buy less than we think. I've often had this idea that, you know, it has to have some sort of a purple cow. Has anyone heard of the concept purple cow?
Yeah.
Which is,
The marketer term, right? He's a Seth Godin term, probably.
yes, it's, what's his name?
Seth Godin.
Seth Godin, yes, thank you for the reminder. He had a book a few years ago called Purple Cow, and it's this idea that you're driving along the road and you see brown cows and white cows, and then you see a purple cow, and you say, that's interesting. Well, I think products are the same way. And with a purple cow in your product, you don't have to have as many of the other features, right? If you could solve a core problem that they have, right? It has to solve a problem. And you add on something that is really valuable and interesting that they didn't expect. That's the recipe for a really, really exciting product, really compelling product. Okay. All right, so what you're doing is, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail because this comes up after the break, this part of the process. But basically, you're pivoting as you learn, and then you just repeat until you have an idea of who's going to buy. Okay? All right, so Product Plan is my current company. We did our validation with 30 interviews before we started building the product.
Wait a minute, Jim. You introduced yourself and said you were a product manager your whole career. Why would you have to validate a product?
Thank you for that softball question, Dave. Dave just asked me why I had to validate it, even though I was a career product manager. Because I got it wrong, right? I originally started with a different idea. And it wasn't until we did these interviews that we really understood what it was that we needed to build. And we were bootstrapping it. We were using our own money to build the product. So that meant that we couldn't make mistakes. We could, but then we would be, spending a lot more money that we didn't have to spend. And so I did different techniques, such as launching landing pages, fake websites, basically, that people signed up for a product that didn't exist. So we put on their free preview, drove traffic to it with Google AdWords, with LinkedIn ads, and this helped us test the sales model, this online acquisition model. It helped us test how much it would cost us to acquire customers, and it proved to us that people were interested enough in the problem to try to look for a solution. And through that process, it helped us acquire our first customers. So people were signing up for a product that didn't exist, and then we called them and said, we're working on this product and we would love to make this product perfect for you. And so that was a very valuable experience, and the stakes were high because it was my own money.
Pay attention to this. 30 before coding anything.
Yeah. Yeah, we did it with Keynote. Those were our prototypes. We mocked it up in Keynote, and we were presenting, and it changed every 3 or 4 interviews. We were changing it up. Yes.
You mentioned earlier how the more interviews you do, there are diminishing returns.
Yeah.
How do you know what was the stopping point where you know how to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is not a science. It is a feeling. And I've always believed that, and I'll talk about this too in a second, perfect is the enemy of good. That if we strive for,
slide, okay?
yeah, oh, perfect. If we try to get risk-free, make it to the point where it's risk-free, if we try to get it to the point where we know for sure, then we've waited too long, right? So you have to judge and know that I think I'm about 80%. I know about 80% of what I think I need to know. And so for us, the point where we said, yes, we're going to start this company, and yes, we're going to do this business, came at around 30, where we said, okay, we know enough. We feel pretty good about this. Not perfect, but we feel pretty good. And even at that point, it's still a draft, right? We still hadn't started coding yet. We still didn't know what all the corner cases and pitfalls would be along the way. And so you have to know that even after market validation, it will change. Yes?
I have another question. So when you said 30 interviews, were they 30 unique interviews? Like,
Yes.
did you ever go back to previous customers again
Yes.
after you built your product?
Yeah, so by the time we were done, we had interviewed 70 people, and some of those were repeat interviews because in the beginning, we're validating the problem, and we're showing them conceptual mock-ups of the product, and then we would go back to people and start to talk to them about pricing. When we were getting a little bit closer, we would talk to them about pricing. We knew roughly what our model was going to be. It was going to be subscription-based pricing, charged per user, but we didn't know exactly the price. We didn't know, is it $39? Is it $49? Is it $59? That sort of thing. And so we would go back and do validation interviews with repeat people again.
So you were talking that you need to build an MVP, right?
Yes.
And then you said that allows people to buy the product, right? So how do you decide the threshold over which people will invest in the product, right? So how do you decide the threshold?
Yeah, so the question is about the MVP and how you decide what the MVP is and what is enough of an MVP in order for people to buy. Yeah. And that again it's not science. So we went into our validation and we thought that we didn't have to build a PDF feature on our product. And we got into our interviews and we told them our product will not have a PDF feature. And people said, oh, I need a PDF feature. That's imperative for me. And this is why I need it. And we had people explain how they would use it. Would they print it out? Would they put it in email? Explain to me how you would use this feature. And through that, the PDF feature became part of our MVP. We realized that it would be a real sticky point to not have that feature. So again, it's a very much a feeling and an instinct about what goes in and what goes out. But as part of the validation, we got into the habit of telling people what it wouldn't have in the first version. And that helps us a lot with the triangulation of what the minimum viable product needed to be. Yeah. Yes?
How does it work for customers that you might not support now, but I think we share next slide to that?
Yes. Yeah. And so there's a little bit of an art, and you don't want to say we'll never do that because we don't know. But the way that I say things like that is that we imagine that will be a part of the product someday. We will support that someday without making promises. That's the thing. The language that you use in especially later in the process is important because you don't want to be setting people up for promises that you can't fulfill. So yeah, so that's a little bit of a tricky one to navigate.
Okay.
Okay. Be curious. Think like a scientist, and failure is good. If you aren't able to connect with people, that's a signal. If you get into the interviews and you get crickets, people aren't willing to really share with you, that's a signal, right? If you get into it and you find only 2 customers who are willing to potentially buy, that's okay, because it gives you information so you can continue to tack and adjust and keep at it because your ideas are good and there is something there. So keep at it.